Siang Pak Wadek. Nggak usah pakai background, nggak kelihatan.
Operatornya Bu Ati ya?
Operatornya bukan. Masuk ya Pak suaranya, bocor ya?
Hah?
Suaranya bocor ya?
Bisa didengar suara saya?
Terdengar Pak. Sampun sarapan Pak Wadek?
Alhamdulillah sudah.
Alhamdulillah. Berarti siap. Moderator, sudah ya? Oke. Baik, sudah waktu menunjukkan pukul 9 lebih 2 menit ya. Alhamdulillah kita coba untuk on time, berapapun peserta yang hadir, terlihat di situ sudah bergabung 99, berarti dikurangi oleh dosen ekonomi syariah dan juga pembicara maupun dari dekanat. Alhamdulillah sudah bisa join lebih dari 50 peserta ya, karena harapan kami semua mahasiswa ekonomi syariah bisa bergabung pada acara kali ini. Baik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, puji syukur kehadirat Allah SWT karena pada pagi hari ini kita bisa berkumpul meskipun berkumpulnya dalam masih dibatasi oleh jarak ya, meskipun tidak dibatasi oleh waktu. Jadi kita masih dalam kondisi pandemi sehingga untuk pertemuan masih menggunakan virtual atau masih menggunakan online ya. Tapi alhamdulillah dengan adanya kondisi seperti ini tidak menyurutkan kita untuk tetap menuntut ilmu, mencari tambahan ya, tambahan pengetahuan dan wawasan sehingga anak-anakku sekalian, mahasiswa ekonomi syariah bisa bergabung untuk memenuhi dahaga akan ilmu pengetahuan gitu. Baik, selawat salam juga kita sampaikan kepada junjungan kita Nabi besar Muhammad SAW, keluarga beserta pengikutnya hingga akhir zaman. Pertama-tama kami sampaikan terima kasih kepada Bapak Wakil Dekan 1 yang mewakili jajaran dekanat sudah menyempatkan waktu pada pagi hari ini untuk kemudian nanti bisa melakukan welcoming speech untuk menyebut program kita. Kemudian selamat datang juga pembicara Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim. How are you, Kabiru?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good to meet you again.
Yes, nice to meet you also.
Okay. Thank you for your participation for this program, Kabiru.
Thank you. The pleasure is
Yang selanjutnya terima kasih kepada para dosen ekonomi syariah yang luar biasa ya sehingga program ini bisa terlaksana. Dan yang tentu saja tidak kami lupakan adalah anak-anakku sekalian, mahasiswa-mahasiswi program studi ekonomi syariah yang kami banggakan mulai dari angkatan 2020 ya sampai angkatan kami harap angkatan yang masih aktif ya 2017, 18, 16 yang masih aktif di kampus bisa mengikuti program seperti ini. Baik, program ini sekelumit saja kami sampaikan. Jadi untuk program kuliah tamu atau guest lecture ini sebenarnya adalah program yang ingin digagas terus oleh program Prodi Ekonomi Syariah. Jadi ini sebenarnya adalah awal ya atau pembuka untuk meningkatkan knowledge atau pengetahuan mahasiswa kita, tidak saja tentang perbankan dan kondisi ekonomi dalam negeri tapi juga global ya, karena kita ingin juga wawasan-wawasan yang terkait dengan yang seperti sesuai dengan tema yaitu perdagangan dan seterusnya itu juga menjadi bahan atau wawasan yang bisa meningkatkan kualitas sumber daya manusia terutama mahasiswa-mahasiswa kita di program studi ekonomi syariah. Jadi seperti yang tadi saya sampaikan bahwasanya program ini adalah program yang insya Allah akan berkelanjutan. Jadi ini untuk guest lecture dengan pembicara Dr. Kabiru Hannafi adalah awal mula. Setelah itu nanti insya Allah akan kita buat rutin setting seminggu atau 2 minggu sekali yang kita harapkan juga akan memberikan nuansa atau warna yang berbeda karena juga akan kami memberikan materi dengan perbankan dan lain sebagainya yang dibutuhkan oleh mahasiswa-mahasiswi kita di Prodi Ekonomi Syariah. Baik, tidak berpanjang kata, sebelum kita mulai acara kita buka dengan bacaan basmalah, dipersilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Dilanjutkan dengan sambutan atau welcoming speech oleh Wakil Dekan 1 kepada Bapak Imamul Hakim SE MSH, kami persilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Halo Mr. Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good morning.
Okay, how are you today?
Yeah, fine and good.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Nahmadu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. May yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlil fala hadiyalah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Let's express and thanks the presence of Allah Almighty, the salawat and salam to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma shalli wa sallim. Honorable Dr. Ibrahim and Miss Atik, Master of Ceremony today, and Mr. Fadil as a moderator, and all lecturers of Sharia Economics, and all audience. Okay, before I continue my speech, because the audience mostly use Indonesian language, it is not fair. I speak in English.
Yes, really. Really.
Okay, so I will continue my speech in Indonesia.
Yes, good.
Yeah, because my English is not good. Oke, hadirin para audien mahasiswa ekonomi syariah, mari kita sambut bersama-sama program dari Prodi Ekonomi Syariah. Saya kira ini adalah program yang luar biasa, ya. Program yang luar biasa, dan ini sebenarnya adalah program yang mendukung kompetensi mahasiswa untuk memahami, ya, untuk memahami basic keilmuan ekonomi syariah secara utuh, ya. Selama ini mungkin kita di bangku perkuliahan kita mendapatkan teori-teori, ya, kita mendapatkan teori-teori dari para dosen dan juga ya mungkin motivasi dan lain sebagainya. Tapi saya berharap kegiatan ini justru mendukung bagaimana konteks teori yang ada itu mencoba untuk dikaji dengan mengkaji fenomena-fenomena yang ada di lapangan. Itu yang sesungguhnya fenomena-fenomena itulah, ya, yang akan dihadapi oleh mahasiswa ketika nanti sudah benar-benar masuk di dunia kerja maupun bergabung di masyarakat umum. Hal ini nanti saya yakin kalian semuanya akan mendapati. Ada banyak hal yang belum mampu tercover, ya. Ada banyak hal karena saya kira mengkaji tentang ekonomi syariah itu tidak bisa dalam konteks 1-2 tahun atau hanya selesai di dalam S1. Saya kira itu tidak. Ya. Bu Ati aja sampai belajar hingga sekarang menuju doktor. Pak Rahmat sudah sampai udah S3. Hanya wadiknya ini yang belum, ini mudah-mudahan segera. Ya, mohon doanya semuanya. Jadi memang mempelajari ekonomi syariah itu tidak mutlak hanya di lingkungan bangku perkuliahan saja. Kita harus mendukung dengan kajian-kajian yang seperti ini. Saya sangat bergembira sekali ya, karena ini menciptakan academic culture ya. Jadi kenapa demikian ya? Nanti kalian di masyarakat itu akan menghadapi banyak fenomena-fenomena yang memungkinkan kalian harus mengembangkan, menganalisa lebih jauh tentang teori-teori yang sudah diberikan oleh para dosen. Salah satu contoh aja ya, dalam konsep redistribusi pendapatan, atau yang banyak dikenal selama ini adalah Islamic philanthropy. Itu kajiannya sangat banyak sekali. Contoh saja katakanlah tentang zakat. Ya, zakat itu walaupun konteksnya mungkin kita pelajari secara teori seperti itu, tapi nanti akan di lapangan kita akan banyak menghadapi pertanyaan-pertanyaan dari masyarakat. Contohnya seumpama, kalau kalian nggak bisa menghitung ya, atau katakanlah begini, ditanyai oleh masyarakat, apakah pendapatan seperti ini itu layak dizakati? Apakah pendapatan ini, ya katakanlah kan banyak sekali pendapatan-pendapatan baru yang sebelumnya dan pada zaman Rasulullah tidak ada. Itu akan menjadi problem yang harus kalian hadapi dan kalian harus mampu menjawabnya. Nah, salah satu contoh saja. Belum dalam konteks bagaimana menghitung, ya, menghitung zakat katakanlah yang paling ya, yang sering mungkin akan kita hadapi adalah zakat pendapatan, zakat gaji, zakat profesi katakanlah. Atau yang lebih rumit lagi adalah zakat perdagangan. Nah, ini semuanya adalah tapi saya kira nanti di Prodi Ekonomi Syariah akan memfasilitasi itu semuanya, dan kajian-kajian yang sebenarnya bisa dikembangkan adalah contohnya umpamanya tadi harta-harta yang kemungkinan, harta-harta pendapatan baru yang kemungkinan dizakati itu bisa kita kaji dalam momen-momen kajian-kajian seperti ini. Nah, belum lagi kalau berkenaan dengan memproduktifkan zakat, memproduktifkan wakaf dan lain-lain. Kalian akan dituntut untuk benar-benar ketika terjun di masyarakat adalah seperti itu. Maka kajian-kajian pengembangan seperti ini adalah sarana untuk mendukung. Ya, jadi saya berharap sekali semua mahasiswa ekonomi syariah untuk turut dalam kajian-kajian seperti ini, dan saya berharap Prodi memfasilitasi dengan kajian-kajian yang sifatnya mutakhir. Saya membaca CV dari Dr. Ibrahim ya. Ini Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim ya. Saya membaca CV-nya beliau ini spesifik banget, dia keahliannya memang di bidang perdagangan. Itu saya melihat itu. Jadi ini memang yang dihadirkan berarti memang orang yang ahlinya, ya, orang yang expert ya, di bidang perdagangan. Jadi ini saya kira ini hal yang positif yang seharusnya kita terima. Saya kira saya tidak harus sambutan terlalu banyak, nanti saya khawatir mengeliminasi waktunya Dr. Ibrahim ya. Oke. Ya, selaku dekan ya. As a Vice Dean, thanks to Dr. Ibrahim who is willing to be an expert speaker today ya. And I hope the program like this become part of an effort to create a good academic culture. Yeah. And I'm sorry, Dr. Ibrahim, I can't join this discussion until finish because there are other activities that I have to participate in. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, Dr. Ibrahim. Maybe in the next time we will discuss about this topic ya. Oke. Saya kira itu saya akhiri selaku dekan, selaku wakil dekan ya, saya berterima kasih sekali kepada mahasiswa ekonomi syariah yang turut serta, dan saya berharap nanti ini sebagai brand image kita dalam membangun academic culture. Ya, terima kasih Bu Ati, Pak Fadil, Pak Novi, Pak Rahmat, dan seluruh dosen ekonomi syariah, especially for Mr. Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim. Ya. Oke.
Ini soulmate saya ini Pak, classmate.
Oke, saya kira itu saya akhiri. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih kami sampaikan kepada Bapak Imamul Hakim SE MSH yang telah memberikan sambutan dari mengatasnamakan atau mewakili dekan atau di jajaran dekanat. Baik, kami harapkan juga ini tidak hanya pertemuan pertama dan terakhir ya untuk Mr. Kabiru ya. Kami harapkan pertemuan-pertemuan yang akan datang kita juga masih bisa mendatangkan beliau dengan tentu saja dengan tema-tema yang berbeda dengan hari ini. Baik, sebelum ke inti acara yaitu webinar atau seminar tentang perdagangan dan kaitannya atau keterkaitan dengan lingkungan, perlu kami sampaikan informasi kepada mahasiswa-mahasiswa Prodi Ekonomi Syariah bahwasanya untuk yang semester atau mahasiswa angkatan 2020 barangkali yang belum menempuh mata kuliah ekonomi internasional barangkali mungkin bertanya-tanya ya keterkaitan antara materi ini dengan prodi kita yang ekonomi Islam atau ekonomi syariah begitu. Jadi sebagaimana yang tertera atau ditulis dalam flyer atau judul dari kajian kali ini tentang perdagangan, ini akan membawahi atau sebenarnya adalah proses pengerucutan materi yang akan saudara dapatkan insya Allah di semester 5, sekitar semester 5-6 tentang ekonomi internasional, di mana ekonomi internasional salah satunya kita juga akan membahas tentang bagaimana proses trading atau proses perdagangan terkait dengan ekspor dan impor. Jadi semua hal yang kita berikan, kajian-kajian yang kita berikan atau kita adakan di prodi kita, memang kita harapkan menambah wawasan ya. Jadi tidak melulu tentang sektor moneter, tidak melulu tentang sektor perbankan, tapi kita menginginkan memang output dari prodi kita ini adalah wawasan yang universal begitu ya. Jadi ekonomi itu luas, apalagi ekonomi Islam, apalagi ekonomi syariah. Jadi justru sangat luas kajiannya begitu ya, sehingga kajian tentang perdagangan ini menjadi begitu penting dikaitkan apalagi ya untuk tema dari Dr. Kabiru ini adalah terkait dengan environment gitu ya, terkait dengan lingkungan. Pasti dalam ilmu-ilmu yang sudah kita belajar di awal tentang mungkin ayat Al-Quran dan hadis atau mungkin kajian-kajian atau mungkin tema-tema materi kuliah di awal, tentu ada poin-poin penting ya tentang bagaimana sebagai manusia perlu kita harus bijak. Tidak hanya bijak terhadap diri kita, tidak hanya bijak terhadap sosial atau sekitar kita, tapi juga bijak terhadap lingkungan kita. Karena bagaimanapun juga kita juga didukung oleh lingkungan, sumber daya alam gitu ya. Maka justru sebuah kewajaran atau sebuah keniscayaan kita selain memikirkan tentang bagaimana meningkatkan output ya, kita juga harus memikirkan tentang kondisi lingkungan ya, sehingga inilah mungkin ya yang mendasari fokusnya tadi yang disampaikan Pak Wadek 1 ya, bagaimana Mr. atau Dr. Kabiru ini memang benar-benar concern untuk masalah perdagangan yang nanti akan diulas dengan diantarkan oleh moderator kita Pak Fadil. Baik, selanjutnya adalah acara inti yaitu kuliah tamu tentang perdagangan atau Nexus and Environment Trade and Environment Nexus yang akan disampaikan oleh Dr. Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim dan akan dimoderatori oleh Bapak Fadila Muhammad Mahdi yang sebagaimana kita tahu beliau adalah dosen ekonomi syariah dengan spesifikasi keuangan atau akuntansi. Beliau akan menghantarkan pemateri kita pada pagi hari ini untuk mengupas ya lebih banyak tentang bagaimana proses trading dan bagaimana perdagangan itu nanti bisa mempengaruhi lingkungan di sekitar kita dengan riset-riset yang sudah beliau lakukan. Kami persilakan Pak moderator, Pak Fadil untuk membawa acara ini sampai selesai ke depan. Dipersilakan Pak Fadil.
Okay, thank you Bu Ati for the time and the this opportunity. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Firstly, I'd like to thank to our Honorable Vice Dean and also the speaker, committee, and our beloved participant, who mostly are the students from Islamic Economic Department. I proudly welcome you to the international webinar that is held by Islamic Economic Department of University of Muhammadiyah Malang. On this very special occasion, we are going to listen, discuss, and gain valuable knowledge about trading and its connection to environmental issue. As we know that environmental issue nowadays become so popular and being discussed in many seminars and conferences. The range of them is so wide, ranging from climate changes, renewable energy, and also social issues, including economics and trade. In this webinar, we are going to discuss the trade and environment nexus with our distinguished speaker, Dr. Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim. Okay, before we go any further, I would like to read the CV from the speaker. From the educational background, he just completed his doctoral degree in University of Erlangga, and then he has master degree in also in economics from Lovely Professional University India, and also he got his bachelor degree in economics in Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria. His working experience, mostly of his working experience as academicians, yeah. And now he is the lecturer 2 of Federal University Nigeria. And as academician, he has many of publications that I cannot mention them one by one because it will take so much time. So you can type on Google Scholars and type his name, Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim. There is so much information about his publication, and one of them will be presented in this morning. All right, Mr. Kabiru, can I call your name as Mr. Kabiru? Or
Yes, sir. It's okay. Anyone.
Okay, Kabiru, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I will call you Mr. Kabiru. Please welcome. I welcome you to deliver your presentation. Maybe until 10:30. Can you have a time until 10:30?
Yes, inshallah.
Okay. Okay. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start sharing the slide.
Wait.
So, visible this slide? Is my slide visible?
Yes.
Can be seen now?
Yes, yeah, okay.
It's very clear.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful, all praises and are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making it possible for us to meet at this session of guest lecture organized by the Department of Islamic Economics, University Muhammadiyah Malang. First of all, the Deputy Dean, Faculty of Economics, Islamic Economics, Pak Imamul Hakim, the moderator, Pak Fadila M. Mahadi of the Department of Sharia Economics, the inviter of me in person of Ibu Muslihati of the Department of Sharia Economics, all the organizers whose name I cannot mention, the participants, or simply my friends, I can say, students, as well as brothers and sisters. I would like to, first of all, extend my morning greeting to all of you. So for that, I'm saying good morning to all of you. To begin with introduction, I was introduced by the moderator My name is Kabiru Hannafi Ibrahim. I'm here this morning in this very important session to share with you the little I have known and learned about trade and environment. On this note, I will share with you on the relationship between trade and environment, or simply put, how does trade affect the environment, which can be looked at as environmental quality or environmental pollutants. So if that is the case from the onset, we need to have a little understanding of the concept of trade and the environment. Though you may feel that it is too elementary for me to define the concept of trade and environment. So to me, as a background, I consider it to be very important aspect to start with in this lecture session. So let us start from the slide. So let us start with the concept of trade. As we all know in economics, whenever we talk of trade, in most cases, we are talking about international trade, not local or domestic trade that we are familiar with within our countries. So in this regard, we need to have a clear understanding of what international trade entails. And in the whole of our discussion, whenever we talk of trade, or whenever I talk of trade, I'm simply referring to foreign trade or international trade, not the local or domestic trade. So as we all know, international trade is the exchange of goods and services between two or more countries. And this definition implied that for trade to occur, there must be at least two countries. This is the main reason why in economics, or why most trade theories in economics were based on the assumption of two countries world, meaning that for trade to occur, there must be at least two countries. No country in the world can exist in isolation as an independent nation without trading with other countries in the world. So for that, trade is important for countries globally, as it allows people in one country to have the opportunity to acquire goods and services from other countries that were not available in their own countries. So our understanding of trade in economics domain is beyond the mere the way I define trade itself. There are certain concepts that we look at to represent trade or proxy trade if we are talking about trade. So what are those concepts? These are export. We are familiar with the concept of export, concept of import, total trade, trade to GDP ratio, trade as a percentage of world trade, and many more measures of trade openness that can be found in the literature of foreign trade. So the concept can also be disaggregated to include goods and services trade, to cover goods and services trade. This is important because the two trading systems operate through different modes. And if that is the case, whenever we talk about trade and the environment, then we can expect the two trading systems, goods and services, to assert different impacts on the environment. So if that is the case, they have different role in generating environmental damages if trade really does affect the environment. So let's move to the concept of environment also to have a little understanding of it. So the word environment simply refers to our surroundings. The environment encompasses the living things, which is a biotic aspect of the environment, and the abiotic aspect of the environment, which are non-living things. So the word environment, if we look at, is multidimensional because it covers almost everything on Earth, be it a living things or non-living things, be it tangible or intangible. So in economics and environmental studies, we use some concepts that are entirely or looked different from the abiotic aspect of the environment, which are living things or people, plant and animals, to represent the environment. And they are also part of our surroundings. And these concepts are known to us We will be hearing people saying greenhouse gas emissions. We will be hearing people saying carbon dioxide emissions. We will be hearing people saying sulfur dioxide emissions. We will also be hearing people saying nitrous oxide emissions, suspended particulate matter, volatile compound, air quality, and so on and so forth. So we need to ask why this concept represents the environment. So they represent the environment because of the fact that they are related to human activities, and human is an important part of the environment. In the first place, emissions are generated because of human desire to produce goods and services, because of human desire to consume goods and services, because of human desire to trade the surplus in case if there is to the people that are in need of it. So now, if we look at the way we define trade, we define and understand the concept of trade and the environment, we may need to ask a number of questions. These questions may include, are trade and environment interlinked? Are trade and environment related? Or we may ask another question, does trade affect the environment? Is trade good or bad for the environment? So these are key questions that we need to ask. So as far as this lecture is concerned, we will concentrate on the last question on the question I rose, which is how does trade affect the environment, or how does trade relate to the environment? So the entire discussion of this time will be based on how trade affect the environment or how trade relate to the environment. So this question I raised, or this particular question we are going to focus on, can be well answered through empirical study. By empirical study, I mean a thorough study through the use of what? Data. But for the sake of our discussion, I will only focus on this question as I made mention. So now, we need to ask, how does trade affect the environment? We need to give a brief answer to that. So the answer to this question will serve as a background of the whole of our discussion. So it is believed that countries in the world, or countries around the world, have over the last few decades experienced an increase in economic globalization, of which trade is among. And at the same time, the countries in the world also experience an enormous increase in emissions, as well as environmental degradations. So if we look at the way trade increased and then environmental degradation increased at the same time, can we consider, will this be called coincidence? This happening will make us understand that trade and the environment are related, or trade do affect the environment, or trade is related to the environment. So the country's resource utilization, utilization is influenced by international trade. So if resource utilization of a country is influenced by foreign trade or international trade, then trade expansion can have a direct impact on the environment, by increasing pollution, by depleting natural resources, or if trade is beneficial to the environment by decreasing emissions. So foreign trade has been known to geographically separate producers and consumers. And if that is the case, it will create an avenue for consumers in one country to transfer their own emission to another country, known as the exporting countries. So it is also believed that more than 20% of the global emissions, by global emission, I simply means carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide emission is a vital measure of the environmental quality, and it is believed that more than 20% of it more than 20% of such emissions are embodied in the international trade or global trade. And it is also believed that from 1995 until today, global emission increased by 4% each and every year as international trade or foreign trade increases. So with this background, we can clearly understand that trade does affect the environment. Why? Because we have narrated so many things to make us understand that yes, trade is related to the environment. But the most important aspect we need to have a glance look at is the ways or channels via which trade affect the environment. So these channels can be well understood looking at the theoretical underpinning of trade and the environment nexus. So discuss some which will make us understand the ways trade affect the environment. Some of these theories are trade harm theory, gains from trade theory, complexity trade theory. We will also move to some concept of the scale technique and composition effect. We will also explore some thorough theoretical aspects explaining the links between trade and the environment, which are environmental Kuznets hypothesis, the rest to the bottom hypothesis, pollution having hypothesis, and the factor abundance hypothesis. So let us start with trade harm theory. So if you look at the theory is simple. The theory simply states that asserted that trade harm the environment. And from this, we can clearly understand that this theory is telling us that trade is bad for the environment. So the proponent of this theory do believe that trade is good for economic growth. They did not deny that. They did not deny the fact that trade is good for the economic growth. But their only fear is just that trade may harm non-environmental, non-economic goals. And what are those non-economic goals? Are nothing but environmental aspects of our own life. So the proponent of this theory also argued that trade increased competition among countries. And for countries to maintain comparative advantage of pollution-intensive industries, then developing countries are posed to reduce environmental standards in their own country. And if environmental standards are reduced, environmental regulations are reduced, then there is a tendency for the environment to be degraded. Therefore, the success of trade openness in promoting competition and rising income may have the tendency to increase environmental degradation. So this is the view of the proponent of the trade harm theory. So let us move to the gains from trade theory. So the gains from trade theory simply assert that trade improves the environment. And this theory works or operates in contrast to the trade harm theory. According to this theory, trade is good for the environment. The theory simply asserts that trade provides a win-win situation by improving the economy as well as the environment. So the proponent of this theory have argued that in both the trading countries, trade might increase economic growth and increase environmental quality, because trade in this growth, any growth that may arise from trade may generate resources that could be used for environmental protection, which will lead to a better environment. So to them, trade allows for the growing international environmental standards, which also improve environmental quality. To them also, trade also allows for the managerial and technological innovations in an open economy. This is because foreign cooperations or multinational cooperations mostly tends to adopt a clean state-of-the-art technique of production that in the host countries they are operating. And if that is the case, then there is a tendency for their operations to bring a better environment, reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And the next theory is a complex relationship theory. So if we look at, according to this theory, the relationship between trade and the environment is complex, meaning that they are not certain as to whether trade can harm the environment or trade can benefit the environment. Trade, according to them, according to the proponent of this theory, trade can have a beneficial or detrimental effect on the environment, and this effect depends on whether a country specializes in a dirtier or a cleaner product. So according to the proponent of this theory also, if trade actually or really reflect countries' industrialization process, then there is a tendency for trade at the initial stage of industrialization or economic development to cause environmental damages. And at the later stage of economic development, to improve environmental quality by reducing environmental degradations. So if we look at the complex relationship theory, then under the scenario of a complex relationship theory, then the impact of trade on the environment may follow the pattern of an inverted U-shape. Then if that is the case, if the patterns will follow inverted U-shape, then there is a tendency for there is a need for we to talk about the environmental Kuznets curve. So if we look from the theoretical background, we discuss like gains from trade theory, trade harm theory, and complex relationship theory, we can clearly understand that the effect of foreign trade on the environmental quality can depend on the scale, on the technique, as well as the composition effect of trade. So now we need to look at the scale, technique, as well as the composition effect of trade openness. So let us start with the scale effect. So the scale effect of trade is very simple to understand. The scale effect of trade simply suggests that trade openness causes environmental degradation, meaning that trade openness causes environmental damages. Why? Because of an increased volume, because of an increase in the volume of trade, economic activities, increase in the volume of economic activities, and because of more resource consumption. There is no way that you can open your own economy in order to trade more without having increase in the volume of trade itself, increase in the volume of economic activities, and increase in the use of resources. So if that, it is believed that trade increase per capita income because it will increase the volume of economic activities. So increase in per capita income, if we look at, is positively correlated with energy consumption, meaning that per capita income increase must be accompanied with increase in energy consumption. And increase in energy consumption, if we look at, especially if we are not using renewable energy resources, will also be accompanied with increase in emissions as well as environmental degradation, in which case environmental quality will be reduced. So via the scale effect, liberalization can increase countries' export of goods and services, which may result in a further growth and increase in environmental degradations or emissions. So let us move to the next effect, which is technique effect of trade openness. So the technique effect of trade openness recognized that trade openness can reduce environmental degradations, and it allows, because it allows for the use and the implement of environment-friendly technologies, which will result in an improved energy use. And if energy use improved, then there will be efficiency in the use of energy, which may result in decreased emissions and improve environmental quality. So if we look at it, an open economy based on this effect is better able to attract foreign direct investment that can result in the use of clean technologies to help mitigate environmental damages, as well as to mitigate or challenge global warming. So the increase in income result from the trade openness can lead to higher economic development that may result in enforcement and the implementation of environmental policies and the regulations, and thereby enhancing environmental quality. So the next effect is the composite effect. So the composite effect simply implies that trade openness can cause both positive and the negative effect on the environment. And this theory is consistent with complex relationship theory. So according to composition effect, the composition effect itself depends on whether a country has a competitive or comparative advantage in a data or killing industries. So with a composition effect or with composite effect of trade, an increase in income can result in a major structural change in an economy. Which may exhibit a change from traditional agriculture. We all know agriculture is less polluting, to industrial sector, which we believe industrial sector is high polluting. And may increase environmental damages to, and finally to the services sector, which we believe that services is less polluting. So under the composition effect, it is believed that poor and developing countries, or in poor and developing countries, increase in trade openness is believed to alter the composition of industries, industrial production toward data industries. And if that is the case, this will decrease environmental quality by increasing emissions, while the reverse may be the case if we look at it from the side of developed countries. So Now, a detailed theoretical aspect of our discussion that explains the relationship between trade and the environment can be further elaborated if we go to if we look at the some theories which are very vital, and these theories are the environmental coordinate gap hypothesis, the race to the bottom theory or hypothesis, the pollution having theory or hypothesis, factor endowment hypothesis or theory. So we are going to look at these 4 theories, which are very important, and they are used by most of the empirical studies on trade and the environment. So now, let me start with the environmental Kuznets gap hypothesis. So the environmental Kuznets gap hypothesis, as we all know, in its original form or in its initial form, is known as a Kuznets gap. And the gap simply postulated that there is an inverted U-shaped nexus between per capita income and income inequality. This hypothesis was put to test by a Simon Kuznets, which we all know is an American economist and a statistician, and was put to test in 1955. So from the early 1990s onward, this hypothesis has gained a wider applicability in areas of economics and environmental sciences, and in environmental aspect of studies. The Kuznets gap has acquired a new reality. Why? Because it is found that there is an evidence of an inverted U-shape when the emission and per capita income interact. So therefore, Kuznets gap has now become a well-known hypothesis for examining the nexus between trade and the environment, or GDP growth and the environment. So Kuznets gap hypothesizes an increase in environmental pollution at the early stage of a country's economic development. And then as a country reach a certain threshold level of per capita income, then the trend reverses, producing an inverted U-shape curve, as demonstrated here. So the environmental Kuznets curve postulated an inverted U-shape relationship between per capita income and environmental damages. So the damaging effect of growth on the environment appeared at a lower level of per capita income, and the beneficial effect of it appear at a higher level of per capita income. So the theoretical reasoning behind the environmental Kuznets gap hypothesis is just that at the initial stage of economic development, increase in environmental degradation is unavoidable. There is no way that you can shun away from environmental damages at the initial stage of economic growth. So now we need to ask a very simple question: why the trend reverses? Why do we have an inverted U-shape? Why the turning point? What are the reasons for the curve to turn away, to turn around? Why the relationship reverse? Then we need to know the reasons. So how can this threshold point or turning point can be attained? So one of the reasons for this threshold point to be attained is one of the reasons is improved technique of production, which is only possible at high level of income. Another reason is advanced trade openness. Advanced trade openness, it is believed that allows for the importation of environment-friendly technology. And environment-friendly technology may reduce environmental pollution. And then another reason for the turning point is the transfer of emission from one country to another, or simply from developed countries to developing countries. This is only possible through via trade openness. If countries are closed, are not opened, then there is no tendency for one country to transfer its emission to another country. Then another reason for the turning point in the environmental Kuznets gap is the demand for environmental quality and protection by the people or by the citizens of a country. Because as people acquire a higher level of income, then they will demand better environment. Then the next theory we will look at is the rest to the bottom theory. So if we look at the rest to the bottom theory, we can clearly understand that the effect of trade openness on the environment that operate via the non-income channel can be explained by this theory. The rest to the bottom hypothesis simply explain that countries that are more open to international trade or foreign trade adopt pure environmental regulations because they fear that they may lose international competitiveness in the world market. So industries and firms that are operating in an open economy, they fear that strict or stringent environmental regulation can increase their cost. And if that is the case, they will lose international competitiveness. They will lose international competitiveness or competitive position in the international market. So because of that, they will now use political pressure and force the government to lessen environmental regulation. And if government lessen environmental regulation because of the fear by industry to lose international competitiveness, then there will be a decrease in environmental standard, and decreased environmental standard may also result in decreased environmental quality because pollution will be increased. Then the next hypothesis is the pollution having hypothesis. So the pollution having hypothesis is one of the prominent hypotheses also that is used to explain the relationship between trade and the environment. The pollution having hypothesis simply stated that to avoid high environmental regulation in advanced countries, pollution-intensive industries move their production from developed countries to developing countries. So also developing countries, in their bid to attract FDI, to increase competition and boost productivity, might adopt lesser environmental regulation. And if that is the case, there will be a decreased environmental quality. And as a result, developing economies will now become havens of pollutions, producing more pollution intensive goods. So this hypothesis therefore consider foreign trade as the main channel via which developed countries can now separate geographically the production and the consumption of goods and services they consume. And the pollution having hypothesis, if we look at, describe a scenario in which trade openness can improve environment in one country and degrade the environment in another country. So let us move to the next slide. Then the next hypothesis or theory is factor endowment hypothesis. Factor endowment hypothesis. Yeah. So the factor endowment hypothesis was based on the standard Dickska-Olin factor endowment theory. And the hypothesis simply argued that resources owned by countries are the major determinant of free trade and environmental degradations. So this hypothesis simply states that countries with abundant capital will specialize in the production of and exportation of capital-intensive goods and services that are more polluting. As a result, countries with abundant capital will now become dirtier and polluted. And with trade openness, countries that are relatively endowed or have abundant labor resources that are put to use in the production of goods and services, then they will become clean. Why? Because it is believed that labor-intensive production is less polluting compared to the capital-intensive production. So if you look at the factor endowment hypothesis, operate in contrast to the pollution having hypothesis. Why? Because according to the factor endowment hypothesis, dirtier goods are produced in advanced countries because advanced countries are the countries with huge, heavy capital equipment. While cleaner goods are produced in developing and less developed countries. While developing, why? Because less developed and developing countries are the countries which are endowed with labor resources and labor intensive production pollute less, and in that case, environmental quality will be improved in less developed and developing countries according to the factor endowment hypothesis. So now we need to ask ourselves a very simple question based on the theories. The theoretical explanation we elaborated sufficiently enough for us to believe that trade does affect the environment either positively or negatively? Can the policymakers act based on the theoretical proposition we elaborated? So the simple answer is no. For policy making, theoretical explanation cannot be used. For policy action, the theoretical explanation cannot solely be used unless supported with empirical evidence. So there is a need to explore the effect of trade openness on the environment within the context of the above theories we made mention, factor endowment, pollution having, and so on and so forth, in order to provide a guide for policy making. So now let's move to the next slide. Now we need to look at what data tell us about trade and environment nexus. This is very important for we to look at. So having discussed the different theories and hypotheses that explain the relationship between trade and the environment, it's important for we to look at the historical data and see the extent and the degree maybe of correlation between trade and the environment. So as far as this class is concerned, I try to collect some data from the World Bank World Development Indicators and explore a simple basic correlations between trade and the environment. And I also disaggregated the data according to countries' income level, which are low income, medium income group, high income group, and the total, which is world sample. So this is this can clearly be seen from the table 1, which is low income countries, table 2, middle income countries, and then we have another table 3, high income countries, and then table 4, which is the total countries in the world. So now we need to look at the table very well. Let us start with table 1. Let us start with table 1. So the whole tables, table 1 to 4, they show the relationship between trade and the environment. As I made mention, in the low income, middle income, high income, and the world. And then its correlation analysis are used. So therefore, the result in the table are nothing but the correlation coefficient. They are not regression elasticities, take note. And then the analysis was conducted, as I made mention, by disaggregating trade itself. We have good trade openness. We have services trade openness. We have total trade. And we also disaggregated the countries in the world into low income, high income, and middle income, and then total countries in the world. So now we need to have a look at table 1. Can we look at the table 1? If we look at the table 1, then we can see that the table show that in the low income countries, trade is significantly and negatively correlated with carbon emission, CO2 emission, except for the total trade. In the case of CO2 emissions, yes, this is true, except for total trade in the case of CO2 emission. So trade is negatively and significantly correlated with CO2 emissions, with nitrous oxide emission, with greenhouse gas emission, except for total trade in the case of these two. So let us look at the table 2 again. So table 2 show that in the middle income countries, if we look at the table thoroughly, trade is positively correlated with all the environmental pollutants, except for the services trade in the case of CO2 emission, right? And then let us move to the next table. Table 3, let us look at the table 3 also. Let us look at the table 3. So Table 3 tells us that for the high-income countries, there is a significant positive association between trade openness and the three measures of the environmental outcomes we use, except for services trade and total trade in the case of what? CO2 emission, that is here. Only here the correlation coefficient is not significant, but for the rest, positive and significant. That is in the case of high-income countries. Then let us look at table 4 also and see what can we learn from table 4. So table 4 shows that trade is positively and significantly correlated with all the three measures of environmental pollutants in the global sample. Table 4 is for the global sample, that is the whole world. So if you look at it, trade is positively correlated with all the three measures of the environmental pollutants. Then what did we learn from this? So it is important to note that based on the correlation coefficient obtained from these tables, table 1 to 4, one cannot conclude that increase in trade openness deteriorate or improve the environmental quality or improve the environment in the world or in the different income groups of countries by increasing or decreasing measures of environmental pollutants. So this is true because correlation is not causation. It's not causation at all. And that the variable trade that we can see may also be responding to other variables, because in most of the empirical studies, variable trade is treated as an endogenous variable, or it is the result of other variables that may be incorporated into the empirical model to analyze the impact of trade on the environment. So for this reason, the effect of trade on the environmental quality can only be arrived at by using maybe regression analysis. So the whole of what we discuss here in table 1 to 4 are nothing but correlation analysis. Then we need to look at the some empirical findings. So the question we need to ask ourselves is that does trade affect the environment? We need to answer this question. This is the question most of the environmentalists ask. Also, many previous studies, many empirical studies conducted have mostly focused on studying the effect of trade on the environment. And these studies mostly use different sample countries, different theoretical model. They use different methodology, different measures of trade openness, and different measures of environmental pollutant. So, the finding from all these previous studies were mixed. Were mixed in the sense that they have an inconclusive findings. Some studies finding a positive effect of trade on the environment, some finding a negative effect on the environment. Why the mixed finding? The mixed finding may be attributed to the use of different sample of countries, because the positive impact of trade openness in Indonesia may not be applicable to my country, Nigeria, for instance, may not be applicable to other countries. So the use of different sample may be attributed to the mixed findings. And different period, using different period of time, some studies cover shorter period of time, some studies cover longer period of time. This may also be attributed. This may also result in the mixed finding. Different theoretical models. Studies are using different theoretical models because there are numerous theoretical models that you can find one that is suitable for your own study and make use of. And then different methodology, different measures of trade openness. We have a number of measures of trade openness. So using different measures of trade openness may have also resulted in the different findings. And different measures of environmental quality. We have different measures of environmental pollutants. We have carbon dioxide emission, greenhouse gas emission, which is an aggregate of all the emissions. We have sulfur dioxide emission, volatile compounds. So researchers are using different measures of environmental pollutants. So this may result in the different findings from previous studies. But for this class, for this discussion of today, for we to have a further explanation of the theories I explained previously, I have used two studies, empirical studies. And these two studies, I just extracted the empirical results from the two studies. The studies were conducted by, let me move to the, were conducted by Ibrahim, Sari, and Handoyo, which is an article in press. And then another article also Kabiru Dia Arosanto, which is impressed also. So these are the result of the studies I have extracted from the studies. Then I will use the result here in order to explain further the theories I explained before. So now we look at table 5. I reported it as table 5, right? So we look at table 5 thoroughly. We have goods and services, meaning that the authors try to disaggregate the effect of trade on the environment by goods and services trade, meaning that they examine the impact of goods and services trade on the environment, and they use a sample of African countries. So now, what are the findings of these two empirical studies? Then we look at GDP coefficient. Here it is. GDP coefficient is the proxy of the scale effect. I explained scale effect under the theoretical underpinning of the trade environment nexus. I explain it. So GDP is a proxy of the scale effect. And then if we look at it, an increase in GDP is associated with increase in carbon emissions. The authors use carbon emissions as a measure of environmental quality. So their findings found that increase in GDP increases carbon emission and degrade the environment. And if that is the case, their finding verified the scale effect in the case of goods trade and in the case of services. Why? Because the coefficient of GDP in the case of goods and services are positive and statistically significant. So empirical findings prove the existence of a scale effect in the case of African countries. So you can collect data and replicate the study using Indonesia, using Asian countries, and see whether you can have a positive scale effect in order to prove the existence of scale effect. So now then we have GDP square here, which measure the technique effect. I discussed technique effect. I explained technique effect under the theoretical underpinning of trade environment nexus. And then if we look at the technique effect, based on the technique effect, or based on the environmental causality hypothesis, further increase in GDP at a later stage of development will be associated with the decreased carbon emission and improved environmental quality based on the environmental causality model. And then if we look at it, our GDP squared here is negative and statistically significant, both in the case of goods as well as services trade. So having obtained positive coefficient of GDP, negative coefficient of GDP squared, then verified the existence of environmental causality in the case of both goods and services trade. Meaning that these authors validate the existence of environmental causality using goods and services trade in the case of African countries. So if we look at it thoroughly, the authors also went further to explore another hypothesis, which I do not explain. I do not mention it in my PPT. Another hypothesis, the hypothesis is called relinking and delinking hypothesis. And the hypothesis is used in order to verify whether the environmental causality hypothesis, if exists, in the case of these empirical studies, yes, it existed. They have validated it. They proved the existence of environmental causality. So this hypothesis, which I do not mention in the PPT, is simply trying to tell us that the inverted use of environmental causality or the turning point of the environmental causality that may lead to the decrease in emission. Will the decrease in emission be sustained in the long run? If it can be sustained in the long run, then the coefficient of GDP cubic be either significant or not significant. And if it cannot be sustained in the long run, then will be positive and significant. And then if we look at it, here is negative and statistically significant, meaning that despite the fact that we use cubic components, still the environmental causality exists. Meaning that the authors try to validate the true patterns of the environmental causality, meaning that they try to validate as to whether after reaching the turning point of the environmental causality, will production again deviate from clean production to dirtier production. So in the case of goods trade, environmental causality hypothesis still exists. In the case of services, then there is an inverted N shape, meaning that production may deviate from clean production to tertiary production after the turning point. So in the case of good trade, there is inverted environmental coordinate, inverted U-shaped environmental coordinate curve. And in the case of services trade, there is an N-shaped nexus between GDP and emission. And remember, GDP squared are all proxy of trade openness, are trying to tell us the impact of trade openness on the environment. So now let us look at the trade direct effect of trade itself on the environment. This is for the services trade, this is for the good trade. So their empirical findings reveal that good trade and services trade are positively impacting on the environmental quality measure as CO2 emissions, meaning that trade degrade the environment in African continent. But the fact is that good trade is more polluting than services trade. Why? Because the coefficient of good trade is higher than the coefficient of services trade. And the authors also went further in order to verify as to whether the relationship between good and services trade is linear or non-linear. And they did so in order for them to further validate the environmental coordinate curve hypothesis. And further validating the environmental coordinate curve hypothesis in this case is that they try to find out as to whether the pattern of the environmental coordinate curve is influenced or is determined by trade openness. Because I explained to you that what actually may lead to the turning point. Among the reasons for the turning point, I made mention of trade openness. So if trade openness really does influence the turning point of the environmental coordinate curve, then we can see here. Then empirical findings have proven in the case of good trade, meaning that good trade shape the patterns of the environmental coordinate curve. But in the case of services trade, the coefficient is not significant. Then there is no reason for we to believe that services trade shape the patterns of the environmental coordinate curve. The authors also use energy consumption, which is very important when it comes to the analysis of the relationship between trade openness and the environment. You need to control for energy consumption, and they did so. They found out energy is positively correlated with the environmental quality measure as CO2 emissions. And the energy, if we look at, is the second most important contributor to the carbon emissions as well as environmental degradation in African countries. And then other vital aspect of our discussion are these three components, three variables. So I made mention of the pollution having hypothesis under the theoretical underpinning. That is the tendency of developed countries to transfer their emission or environmental damages to developing countries. The authors also try to verify the existence of this hypothesis. And the fact is that if the coefficient of the interaction between openness and GDP is positive and significant, then it has proven that developed countries are using trade openness in order to transfer their pollution to developing or African countries. And in the case of good trade, is positive and statistically significant. In the case of services trade, also is positive and statistically significant, meaning that developed countries are using good and services trade in order to transfer their pollution to African countries. But developed countries mostly use good trade to transfer their emissions to African countries. Why? Because the coefficient is more significant in terms of magnitude, is higher than in the case of services. And then I also discuss with you the factor endowment hypothesis, with the hypothesis that operate in contrast to the pollution having hypothesis. The hypothesis that is based on the Hiska-Olin factor endowment theory. So the hypothesis simply stated that countries that are endowed with capital will now produce and export a capital intensive good. And if a country is to produce and export capital intensive good, then that country will become pollution, will become polluted, will become pollution, will be degraded, environmental quality will be reduced. While countries that are endowed with labor, because labor intensive production is less polluting, then their environment will be clean. And then if you look at the sample countries, African countries, for we to validate this hypothesis, then the coefficient of this variable must be negative. Why? Because African countries are endowed with labor and capital. and labor-intensive production is cleaner than capital-intensive production. So does trade openness allow African countries to explore comparative advantage in labor-intensive export and production so that the continent can become less polluted or environmental quality can be improved in the continent? Then in the case of good trade, the authors have proven that, yes, good trade has enabled African countries to explore comparative advantage in labor-intensive export and production that may reduce pollution. So while in the case of services, though the coefficient is negative, it's having the theoretical sign, but it's not statistically significant. So based on this variable, we can simply conclude that good trade openness has enabled African countries to explore comparative advantage in labor-intensive production and export that may lower emission. And then if you look at this coefficient and this coefficient of good trade openness, then we can simply say that trade openness is harmful. The direct effect of trade openness is positive and harmful to the environment, but it has a beneficial indirect effect via capital labor ratio. The authors also tried to explore the indirect effect of trade via energy consumption. And this is based on the hypothesis that open economies will be able to access energy efficient technology. And if you can access energy efficient technology as a result of opening your own economy in order to boost trade, then what will happen? Then you will have a lower emission, because if you are using energy efficient equipment, then there will be efficiency in the use of energy, and having efficiency in the use of energy then must go a long way in reducing environmental degradation. So the authors have found that trade openness, good and services trade openness, has not enabled African countries to have access to energy efficient technology that may reduce emission. Why? Because the coefficient is positive and statistically significant in the case of both good and services trade, meaning that good trade has not enabled the continent to have access to energy efficient equipment that may reduce emission, as well as services trade. And the authors also control for agricultural share, industry share, services share, and then
Kabiru.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's almost ends. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry that I.
Thank you very much. We are almost
okay.
At the last slide. Thank you very much.
The conclusion first, Mr. Kabiru.
Yeah.
Maybe you can read the conclusion.
Simply, the conclusion is very simple, because we discuss different theoretical models, and from the theoretical model we have explained the ways, the channels through which trade can affect the environment. But we also explained that empirical verification of the theoretical background remain unresolved due to the use of different sample countries, different time period, different theoretical models, different methodology, different measures of trade openness, as well as different measures of environmental quality. So this is all about the.
Okay. Thank you for your breakthrough presentation.
Thank you very much.
Very, very complex and multidisciplinary studies.
Yeah.
So give us insightful knowledge for us. Okay, there is some about 2 questions from the audience. Maybe I can read them first. First question comes from Fatur Rezki. He asked about the development of computers will be exponentially better. So the technology will make the industry based on technology be better to protect environment. Is it the development of electricity industry in the future will be the solution of protection of the environment? Okay, maybe one by one question, yeah.
I did not get the question correct. I do not get the question right.
Okay,
The question is not clear to me. The question is not clear.
Oh yeah, maybe in chat room.
In the chat in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, I can see it in the chat.
Yeah,
so
it's about the.
Okay, I have to stop
technology.
sharing, right? I have to stop sharing before I see the chat.
Yeah, please.
I have to stop sharing. Okay, let me stop sharing. So let me go to the chat.
From Fatoreski.
Fatoreski, yeah. I have seen it. Artificial intelligence computers will become exponentially better. Is electricity industry the future solution to protect the environment? So I have seen the question. He said the question is just that the electricity industry, will it be the future solution to protect the environment? Is depends, because electricity is generated through a number of sources. It depends on the source a country used to generate electricity. So if the source is less polluting, definitely it will be the solution of future. It will be a solution to protect the environment in the future. But if the source of electricity is polluting, there is no way that electricity industry solution to protect our environment in the future. So electricity to be the solution of our environmental problem we are facing depend on the source. Which source are we using to generate electricity? We have different sources. So nowadays, countries are now moving to generate electric energy, electricity using different sources. And then if you look at the different sources, we'll see that one source is more environment friendly than the other. So it depends on which one you choose. So nowadays countries are mostly moving to the environment friendly equipment, environment friendly energy sources. That is why even nowadays we are using electric cars. Why are we using electric cars? Because we believe that electric cars are environment friendly than gasoline cars. Now people are moving to solar in terms of using some equipment. Why? Because solar energy is considered to be environment friendly than other sources of energy. So also with the electricity industry, we have hydroelectric energy. Hydroelectric energy generate pollution. So if there is any other source that can generate energy that is more environment friendly, so better impact on it. So it depends on the source we use to generate the electricity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe the second question from Arif Tiadi.
Alif Tiadi, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I can see it.
Yes.
Killing technology transfer and trade orientation, national diffusion of thermochemical pollution technology. Is it included killing technology transfer and trade orientation? Yes. He talks of killing technology. Is killing technology transfer? Is killing technology transfer be included in international trade? International diffusion, thermotechnological technologies, they are all part of international trade. Technology transfer is part of international trade because technology cannot be transferred without even opening your own economy. Only if you open your own economy that you can be able to acquire technology from other countries. So what are the channels? What are the channels countries? What are the channels that countries use to get technology? One of the channels is foreign direct investment, and foreign direct investment also is part of trade. Is part of trade. And then there is no way for you to have an inward foreign direct investment without opening your own economy. So trade comprises a number of things. FDI is part of trade. Technology transfer is part of trade. So really they can be included as part of trade. And then if we look at the technology transfer, if we can be able to acquire technology from other countries, meaning that other countries to transfer their technology to our own countries. If that technology is environment friendly, definitely it will go a long way to mitigate environmental pollution, to mitigate environmental damages. Thank you very much. I hope this question is answered. Alif Seti Adi.
Ya, sepertinya it look like it's been answered in right way. Okay, the last one is from Usama Abdul Jalil. He asked about the nuclear technology. Is it can be safe for the environmental?
Yes.
Yeah,
No,
will be the future technology.
Yes, will be the future. Nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is zero emission, because it's 100% environment friendly. Nuclear energy generates no emission, but the problem with nuclear energy is that it's very expensive to start with, though the maintenance of it is cheaper. Yeah. And the energy generated from nuclear energy is very cheaper compared to other sources of energy. And then also it also have some negative effects. Yes, of course, nuclear energy will be a source of future environmental protection, but we have to bear in our mind it is too expensive, it is too costly to be start in a country to start with. So to develop nuclear plant in a country is too expensive. That is why in the whole world, very few countries are having nuclear energy plants. Yes, it will be a source of future environmental protection because it is 100% environment friendly. I hope this question is answered also.
Okay, thank you. I think that is the last question. So to sum up our presentation, I think the scope of your presentation is so wide, so I cannot even how to make it simple and briefly in conclusion. So I think it's, yeah, in your presentation, I think it is important to adopt environmental issue when we do trading. Not only we cope with the economy issue, but also non-economic issues such as the environmental issue. Okay, thank you for Mr. Kabiru for spending your valuable knowledge and also your time. It is an honorable for us to see you in our first international seminar webinar.
Inshallah.
I hope we will be have another discussion on another webinar.
Yeah, inshallah we will. We will have inshallah.
Okay, I think it's the end of the main seminar, so I will give it back to Bu Muslihati. The time is yours. Thank you, Pak Kabiru.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pak Fadla.
Ya, terima kasih. Terima kasih, Mr. Kabiru. Sedikit pakai bahasa Indonesia.
Ya.
Jangan lupa ya menggunakan bahasa Indonesia ya, Pak Kabiru ya.
Ya, insya-Allah. Coba-coba.
Coba-coba.
Ya.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Fadil juga Dr. Kabiru atas materi tadi yang sudah kita dengarkan bersama ya, bagaimana keterkaitan antara perdagangan juga dengan lingkungan. Insya Allah bagi mereka yang sekarang sedang menempuh mata kuliah yang masih ada tuntutan atau mungkin semester depan masih harus mengikuti materi kuliah lagi, ini bisa menjadi salah satu ide barangkali ya, betapa banyak ide riset yang bisa kita lakukan. Di samping riset-riset mengenai perbankan, kita juga bisa mengembangkan riset tentang ekonomi secara lebih heterogen ya, lebih banyak. Salah satunya adalah tentang bagaimana peran serta perdagangan internasional juga dampaknya terhadap lingkungan. Sekali lagi, prodi kita ini adalah prodi yang sangat kaya gitu ya, akan wacana, juga sangat kaya akan pilihan-pilihan riset, sehingga mungkin dari sini juga akan timbul ya, sekali lagi ide riset tentang bagaimana dalam Al-Quran gitu ya, memperhatikan atau jangan sampai melupakan ya bagaimana kita bisa mengoptimalkan sumber daya alam, tapi juga tidak boleh melupakan keberlangsungan alam itu sendiri. Sehingga ini luar biasa tadi riset yang sudah coba digali oleh Dr. Kabiru ya. Jangan sampai keinginan setiap negara ya untuk meningkatkan pendapatan atau dalam hal ini adalah GDP atau Gross Domestic Product-nya itu bisa berdampak kepada lingkungan ya. Mau pendapatannya naik bertambah sebagai indikator dari negara kaya, tetapi tingkat polusi yang dikeluarkan dari industri yang masif itu juga sangat mempengaruhi lingkungan sekitarnya. Ini juga sesuatu hal yang harus kita perhatikan ya, apalagi ini kan generasi Z ini ya, angkatan 2020 ini kan juga angkatan generasi Z, generasi yang sekarang diberikan beban yang amat berat ya, bagaimana kita bisa memakmurkan bumi ya sebagai khalifah itu tidak hanya bagi diri kita, tapi juga bagaimana kita juga memperhatikan keberlangsungan alam sekitar. Salah satunya adalah meminimalisir polusi, baik dari polusi udara, air, dan lain sebagainya. Baik, tidak terasa waktu yang sudah disediakan oleh panitia, yaitu kurang lebih 1,5 jam, mulai dari pukul 9 hingga pukul 10.30, sudah hampir, bahkan sudah terlewati ya, lewat 1 menit. Sekali lagi terima kasih atas partisipasi. Thank you very much for your participation, Tuan Kabiru.
Yes, thank you very much.
Iya, kita bisa ketemu lagi, bisa jalan-jalan lagi. Now we can meet each other by online. Maybe next time you can come to Malang ya. Before you go back to Nigeria.
Yeah,
Do some discussion, sir.
Inshallah.
Discussion.
Discussion again about international trading and something like that.
Yes, inshallah.
Insya-Allah. Oke, thank you very much. Terima kasih Pak Bali. Sekali lagi untuk anak-anak sekalian, saya ucapkan terima kasih juga atas partisipasi tadi. Ada 3 orang mahasiswa kita. Juga jangan lupa menuliskan presensi di link yang sudah diberikan oleh panitia. Di situ sudah di room chat-nya sudah ada link untuk presensi ya. Jangan lupa karena ini untuk kepentingan materi dan juga untuk kepentingan sertifikat. Sekali lagi, sertifikat yang Anda dapatkan dari acara webinar pada kali ini bisa menambah poin atau SKPI ya yang sangat kita butuhkan untuk kelulusan kita bagi mahasiswa yang baru, bisa untuk kelulusan di masa-masa yang akan datang, gitu ya. Baik, sebelum kita akhiri, kita tutup dengan doa penutup majelis. Dipersilakan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Sekali lagi saya mohon maaf selaku wakil dari atau perwakilan dari panitia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Kabiru.
So thank you very much. Yeah.
Itu ada Nur Adin.
Thank you.
Itu ada Nur join with us.
Yeah, I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have sent your pre-screen ya. During you gave us materials, I have sent your photo in your WhatsApp.
Okay, yes.
Maybe you
really.
need it. Okay.
Yeah, I have seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. So thank you very much. Yeah. So tomorrow will you come to Indonesia, Surabaya?
Inshallah, maybe on Tuesday or Thursday, I don't know. But I have chat with Mbak Ranti. I will go to Surabaya. Maybe we can discuss about GMM or other.
Okay, so no problem. Yeah, no problem.
Please help her to finish the doctoral degree.
My dissertation.
Really.
Tomorrow I have a colloquium, Kabiru.
Yes, I know you have colloquium.
Yeah.
So you are going to attend online, huh?
Yes, I will attend online.
Why not come to campus?
I don't know. I'm not ready.
Wow,
Absolutely, I'm not ready.
You have to be ready from now to tomorrow.
Yeah, Bismillah.
Yeah.
After tomorrow, and then maybe I can discuss with Pak Rosanto or Pak Eric, about the materials, and maybe I can discuss with you about the trade, about theoretical.
Yeah.
And I need your
Yes. You
I
said
need you
you need
to learn me how to running data step by step with GMM. But I use SFA,
SFA.
not GMM.